Rain had just started to fall when Ethan Miller's phone lit up with a message from his stepbrother. "Liam, you doing anything tonight?" It read. Ethan stared at it for a moment, unsure how to respond. It wasn't unusual for Liam to text him out of nowhere, but lately, every exchange between them carried a strange weight, something unspoken hovering just beneath the surface that he typed back a quick "not really," then watched the three dots appear and vanish before Liam finally replied, "Come out for a drive." "Just us." "Been a while." Ethan hesitated. He had assignments to finish, a quiet evening planned, maybe a late-night movie. But something about Liam's message stirred a restless curiosity in him, the kind that made logic sound like a poor excuse. Within 15 minutes, he found himself pulling on his jacket and heading out into the damp, glistening street. Liam's car idled at the corner, headlights slicing through the drizzle. When Ethan opened the door, warmth and music greeted him, soft rock from the 90s, one of Liam's favorite playlists. Liam flashed that easy grin he was known for, the kind that seemed to disarm everyone around him. "Didn't think you'd actually come," he said. "You asked," Ethan replied, sliding into the passenger seat. "I figured you had something in mind." Liam shrugged, shifting the car into drive. "Nothing special. Just felt like getting out." The first few minutes passed in near silence, broken only by the rhythm of wipers brushing across the windshield. Ethan watched the streetlights glide over Liam's profile, sharp jawline, the faint stubble, the steady focus in his eyes. He was 2 years older but carried himself with a confidence that sometimes irritated Ethan. It wasn't arrogance exactly, just a kind of ease Ethan envied. "So," Liam finally said, glancing over, "how's life back from college treating you?" Ethan smirked faintly. Loud. "Mom's always asking what my plan is. Dad pretends not to care, but he listens to every word." Liam chuckled. "Yeah, that sounds about right. Guess you missed the family chaos, huh?" "Not really," Ethan said. They drove beyond the town's main strip, where the neon signs faded into long stretches of quiet road. The rain grew heavier, turning the world outside into streaks of silver. Liam's hand rested casually on the gear shift, his thumb tapping to the beat of the music. "Remember when we used to hate each other?" he said suddenly. Ethan smiled despite himself. "We didn't hate each other. We just didn't talk. You thought I was a jerk. You were." Liam laughed, a low sound that filled the small space between them. "Fair. But you were a ghost, man. Always locked up in your room, headphones in, pretending you couldn't hear anyone." Ethan turned to the window, hiding his grin. "Maybe I just liked silence. Or maybe you didn't trust me." That made Ethan look back. Liam's tone had softened, the humor replaced with something quieter, searching. Ethan wanted to say something honest, like "I didn't know how to trust anyone back then," but the words stuck. Instead, he muttered, "Maybe." Liam didn't press further. He just nodded, as if that one word was enough. By the time they reached the lake on the edge of town, the rain had slowed to a mist. Liam pulled over near the water's edge, killed the engine, and leaned back in his seat. The world outside looked like a painting, dark ripples on the surface, streetlights flickering on wet pavement, trees shivering under the drizzle. Ethan folded his arms, suddenly aware of how quiet it was without the engine. "So this was your big plan? Sitting in the rain?" Liam grinned. "Yeah. Pretty much." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a cigarette, lighting it with a practiced flick. The faint glow illuminated his face, making his eyes look almost golden. "You still smoke too much," Ethan said. "And you still worry too much," Liam shot back, exhaling a thin stream of smoke. They sat there for a while, saying nothing. The sound of water against the shore filled the silence. Ethan couldn't help but feel the air shift between them, not tense exactly, but charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. He noticed the way Liam's voice dropped when he spoke again, softer than before. "You ever feel like we missed something?" Liam asked. "Missed what?" "I don't know. Time. Connection. We went from strangers to family overnight, and it always felt unfinished." Ethan thought about it. He remembered the first awkward dinners after their parents married, the way he avoided eye contact, the jokes he never laughed at. Liam had tried back then, casual chats, invitations, gestures Ethan always brushed off. Maybe because he didn't want to care. Maybe because he didn't know how to. Yeah, Ethan said finally. Maybe we did. Liam nodded slowly, still staring out at the water. Funny how you can live under the same roof as someone and not really know them. Guess that's on both of us, Ethan murmured. Liam turned then, really looking at him. His eyes held a quiet intensity, something neither challenging nor easy to meet. Ethan felt a pulse of awareness, not fear, but recognition. The kind that made his chest tighten. Maybe it's not too late, Liam said quietly. Ethan's breath caught. He looked away, pretending to focus on the ripples in the lake. To be brothers, you mean? Liam gave a faint, unreadable smile. Yeah. Sure. But his tone lingered in Ethan's mind long after. The ride back was slower. Neither spoke much. The music played softly, some melancholic song Ethan didn't recognize. He wanted to ask what it was but didn't trust his voice to sound steady. When they reached the driveway, Liam didn't turn off the car immediately. The rain had stopped, leaving everything damp and quiet. He looked at Ethan one last time, a small smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. Thanks for coming out, he said. Ethan nodded. Yeah. Sure. Liam's gaze lingered for a heartbeat longer before he finally looked away. Good night, Ethan. Ethan stepped out, closing the door gently behind him. The cool air hit his face, sharp and clean. He stood there for a moment, watching the car's taillights fade down the street, until they disappeared completely. Inside, the house was silent. He hung his jacket, sat on the edge of his bed, and stared at his reflection in the dark window. He told himself it had just been a drive, nothing more, nothing less. But the echo of Liam's voice wouldn't fade. Maybe it's not too late. Those words replayed in his head long after the rain had stopped, long after he turned off the lights and lay down, eyes open, wondering why it suddenly felt like something had shifted, something he couldn't name, but would soon be forced to face. And for the first time, Ethan realized he wasn't just thinking about what Liam had said, that he was thinking about how he said it. The next morning, Ethan told himself he wouldn't go near the shed. He rehearsed excuses, errands, phone calls, any diversion that might keep him occupied. Yet as the sun rose higher and shadows stretched across the fields, his resolve faltered. By midday, he found himself pacing near the fence line, his chest tightening at every sound of Marcus's footsteps. When Marcus finally appeared, he carried no tools, no props of casual pretense. His eyes met Ethan's, steady and unflinching, and with a simple tilt of his head, he motioned toward the shed. Ethan followed without a word. Inside, the air felt different than before, warmer, thicker, as though it had absorbed every secret they'd left behind. Marcus closed the door with deliberate care, his hand lingering on the latch. The faint shaft of light through a crack in the wood illuminated his face, softening the sharpness of his jaw, and Ethan realized that this wasn't about small talk anymore. They stood in silence, the kind that wasn't empty but charged, humming with intent. Marcus stepped closer, his presence commanding and yet hesitant, as though he was testing the limits of his own restraint. Ethan's breath came shallow, his body braced for a touch he both dreaded and longed for. Marcus reached out, brushing the back of his fingers across Ethan's hand. It was a fragile gesture, almost tentative, but it carried the weight of unspoken promises. Ethan didn't pull away. That single act, small, fleeting, was the spark that ignited everything. What began with a touch grew bolder each day. Their meetings in the shed became routine, almost ritualistic. Marcus would find reasons to slip away, claiming he needed to check supplies or repair something that could easily have waited. Ethan would already be there, waiting in the dim light, his pulse hammering with a mixture of anticipation and guilt. The first time Marcus kissed him, it wasn't hurried. It was careful, deliberate, as though he needed Ethan to understand this was a choice, not an accident. Ethan felt the world tilt, the rough wood at his back grounding him as Marcus's lips pressed against his. The kiss was both tender and desperate, the culmination of every stolen glance and restrained silence. Afterward, Marcus pulled away, his eyes searching Ethan's face as if waiting for regret to surface. Instead, Ethan whispered, "You don't have to explain." And Marcus, visibly relieved, let the moment linger without justification, but desire, once unleashed, refuses to stay hidden. Their embraces grew longer, their hands bolder, their silences louder. The shed echoed with hurried breaths and whispered confessions, each encounter stitching them closer together and yet tightening the noose of secrecy around their necks. Ethan often thought of Clara, though not with malice. Her presence was like a shadow that neither of them acknowledged within the shed's walls, yet she existed in every hesitation Marcus showed. Ethan told himself he wasn't stealing, Marcus was offering. Still, the thought gnawed at him in the quiet moments, when Marcus wasn't there and the shed stood empty, holding the weight of what they'd done. One afternoon, Clara's voice floated faintly across the yard while Marcus and Ethan lingered inside. The sound froze them both. Marcus pressed a finger to his lips, his eyes wide with something between fear and thrill. Ethan's heart pounded, adrenaline surging as he imagined the door creaking open, Clara's face appearing in the crack of light. But she didn't come. Her voice faded, leaving only the echo of their ragged breaths. When the danger passed, Marcus laughed softly, shaking his head. "Too close," he muttered. Ethan managed a shaky smile, though deep down, the brush with exposure left him shaken, yet the risk seemed only to intensify Marcus's determination. The more dangerous their meetings felt, the more insistent he became. "I can't stop," Marcus admitted one evening, his forehead pressed against Ethan's. "Even if I should." Ethan, caught between conscience and craving, didn't trust himself to answer. Days blurred into a pattern: anticipation, secrecy, indulgence, and guilt. Ethan found himself rearranging his life around Marcus's visits. Each knock at the shed door was a surge of electricity, each farewell a dull ache of absence. He began to wonder if Marcus felt the same hollow loneliness in the hours between. Marcus shared pieces of himself in fragments. He spoke of childhood memories, of dreams he'd once had before settling into the life he now lived. Rarely did he mention Clara, except in passing, as though she were part of a script he recited out of obligation. Ethan listened, storing each confession like a treasure, believing they meant something deeper, that Marcus's heart leaned toward him, even if his life did not. The tension, however, was impossible to ignore. Ethan began to sense the question building inside him, an unspoken plea he was afraid to voice. Was he merely a secret, or was he someone Marcus would ever choose in the daylight? That question grew louder with every touch, every kiss, every hurried whisper in the shed's shadowed walls. And though Marcus never offered an answer, his eyes sometimes betrayed a vulnerability that made Ethan believe he wasn't alone in his torment. Then came the evening when Marcus lingered longer than usual. The shed was cloaked in near darkness, the last sliver of light fading outside. He didn't move to leave, didn't mention Clara waiting in the house. Instead, he rested his hand on Ethan's cheek, his thumb tracing a slow, tender line. "I wish," he began, but stopped, swallowing the rest. Ethan's chest ached. He wanted to demand the end of the sentence, to know what Marcus wished for, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he leaned into the touch, letting silence speak for both of them. The shed, once a refuge, now felt like a pressure chamber. The more time they spent inside, the more the outside world threatened to break through. Clara's presence loomed unspoken, the risk of discovery sharpened with each passing day, yet neither of them seemed willing to let go. By the end of that week, Ethan realized something had shifted. What began as stolen moments of passion had become something heavier, more consuming. He wasn't sure if it was love or obsession, but he knew it was no longer simple, and as he closed the shed door behind him one evening, the air cool against his skin, he sensed the weight of an unasked question pressing harder than ever. Was Marcus prepared to choose him fully, or was Ethan destined to remain the shadow in the shed, hidden from the light of day? The answer hadn't come yet. But it was approaching. Ethan could feel it, a storm building on the horizon, promising to change everything. The next morning arrived with a quiet stillness, broken only by the cry of birds circling the lake. I woke to the sound of Mason rummaging through his bag, muttering about misplaced socks. His hair was messy, his grin unbothered, as though we hadn't shared the suffocating silence of last night. I watched him for a moment before pretending to still be half asleep, uncertain why the sight of him pulling a shirt over his bare torso felt sharper than it should have. By the time I went downstairs, Lucas was already at the table with a mug of coffee in hand, the newspaper he'd picked up at the gas station folded neatly beside him. He looked composed, as though cabins, isolation, and brothers he barely knew were nothing unusual. Mason joined us with a clatter, pulling up a chair and launching into a ramble about hiking trails he'd found on a map pinned to the wall that we decided on a short hike after breakfast. The trail wound through pine and birch, the air thick with the scent of resin and damp earth. Mason darted ahead, calling back to us with bursts of laughter whenever he discovered something trivial, an oddly shaped rock, a squirrel leaping between branches. Lucas kept a steady pace beside me, his silence heavier than the weight of the backpack he carried. At one point, Mason vanished around a bend, leaving Lucas and me alone. The crunch of leaves beneath our boots filled the gap. Finally, Lucas glanced at me. "You're quieter than I expected," he said. That I hesitated, unsure how to respond. "I guess I don't always know what to say." He gave a faint nod, as if that confirmed something he'd already suspected. His eyes lingered on me longer than necessary before he turned away. That glance stayed with me, unsettling in ways I couldn't explain. We reached a clearing that overlooked the lake, the water gleaming under midday sun. Mason threw himself onto the grass, arms spread wide as though claiming the view for himself. "This is what I came for," he said, his voice carrying. Lucas lowered his pack, and I joined him in sitting at the edge. For a while, the three of us were quiet, the world around us hushed and vast. Back at the cabin that evening, the air shifted. A storm rolled in unexpectedly, the sky bruised with heavy clouds. Rain hammered the roof, and when the power flickered out, Mason whooped as though it were an adventure. We lit a few candles, their glow casting shadows that swayed across the wooden walls. Mason produced a deck of cards, insisting on a game. We sat cross-legged on the floor, the flickering light painting our faces in uneven strokes. The game dissolved quickly into laughter and mild arguments about rules Mason kept bending. Yet beneath the playfulness, something else stirred, an awareness that none of us acknowledged. At one point, Mason brushed his hand against mine while reaching for the deck. It might have been accidental, but he didn't pull away immediately. His touch lingered, a spark barely disguised as carelessness. Lucas noticed. I felt his gaze before I dared to look up. His eyes were steady, unreadable, yet they burned with something I couldn't name. We moved on to another game, this one involving questions instead of cards. Mason, naturally, suggested it. "Honesty is required," he declared, raising his beer as though swearing an oath. The questions started harmless: favorite movies, childhood fears, worst jobs. Then Mason leaned back, his grin sly. "All right, Lucas. Who was your first crush?" Lucas took a measured sip of his drink before answering. "A girl in high school," he said simply. But the way he said it, calm, detached, made me wonder if it was the whole truth. Mason's turn came next. He smirked as though daring us. "A guy on my soccer team." He never knew. His eyes flicked toward me for the briefest moment before he looked away. My stomach tightened. When it was my turn, I hesitated too long. Mason leaned forward, clearly enjoying my discomfort. "Don't hold back, Ethan. Rules are rules." I finally muttered something safe about a college classmate, though my voice betrayed the nerves crawling under my skin. Mason's grin widened, but he didn't press further. Lucas, however, watched me with that same unreadable calm, as though peeling back a layer I hadn't meant to show. The storm raged outside, but inside, the air was heavier still. The flicker of candlelight, the sound of rain, the closeness of bodies in a small space, it all pressed in on me. As the night wore on, Mason grew drowsy, eventually curling up on the couch with a blanket tossed carelessly over him. His breathing evened out, leaving just Lucas and me awake. The silence stretched. You don't talk much, but you notice everything, Lucas said quietly, his voice barely rising above the rain. That I didn't answer right away. I was too aware of the distance, or lack of it, between us, the way the shadows cut across his face, sharpening features that already seemed too defined. Is that what you think? I finally asked. That he studied me, his expression calm yet searching. It's what I know. There was no judgment in his tone, only certainty. I felt my chest tighten, the room too small, the air too charged. Before I could respond, Mason stirred, mumbling something incoherent before rolling to his other side. The moment between Lucas and me fractured but didn't disappear. It lingered, a quiet pulse beneath the noise of the storm. That I went upstairs later, lying awake as the rain softened into a steady drizzle. Every detail of the night replayed in my mind, Mason's lingering touch, his casual confession, Lucas's steady gaze, the unspoken truths threading through our silence. The lines between us were no longer clear. Whatever boundaries existed had already begun to shift, and deep down, I knew there was no turning back.